All right, now is the time where we need to really examine how to really kind of make this thing look exactly like what our artist had in mind. Because once we have correct proportions, a really solid foundation, now we can really get in there and really practice our coordination, practice those techniques, which is what makes this type of exercise so valuable, right? So first you need to examine lines, right? Really look at your source image. If you need to zoom in, please feel free to do so on your image. If you're working digitally, if you're working from your phone or from your computer, if you're working from a printout or from a book, really get in there and see where are lines thicker, where are they thinner, where does like the artist drew very fast versus where they slowed down. And you need to kind of take that into your own practice, right? Because remember, we always want to be examining how we can work in different ways, how we can introduce variety, and of course, nuance into our pieces as well. So again, when I'm looking at this piece, I can see that my outer contours get thick here, they get thick there. Again, you can kind of pick out physically where on your drawing things get thicker versus thinner. And of course, we do need to make sure that we emulate that. So I'm going to use my eraser to sort of clean up and kind of push back some of these contours because there are some areas that I do want to keep. I did do a nice job up here when it comes to making clean lines, but of course, during the correction process, oftentimes we should be worrying about getting correct proportions, correct angles, and not much about do our lines look pretty or do things look really clean right now, right? Because of course, remember the tightening phase, the finishing phase, this is where we add in all those little beautiful nuggets of detail that are really going to take this and make it something perhaps a little bit more special. So of course, like I said, I am using my graphite pencil. So pick pencils, change your tools depending on what you need to do. My graphite is a great option for, again, like I said, rich lines versus sharp lines, depending on how you sharpen it. So remember, if you're using charcoal, if you're using graphite, if you're using something else, don't be afraid to change up your tools to get the desired effects. By now, you guys should know your softer pencils do different things than your harder pencils. If you don't have access to multiple types of pencils, remember, you can introduce variety. You just have to work a little bit more diligently. You just have to pay a little bit more attention to how hard you're pressing, how soft you're pressing, how fast you're drawing versus how slow. You can still get a beautiful master study drawing using a single pencil. So I don't want you guys to feel that just because you may not have all the tools that you would hope to have, that you're not capable of creating something amazing for this particular assignment. So of course I'm starting up at the top here because that's what I like to do. But of course you need to go kind of step by step, component by component for this particular piece. And we need to make sure that we really get kind of those little, I need to get that a little bit different. And of course, again, still check. This guy kind of needs to come up a little bit more. Again, you have the piece in front of you, presumably, so you need to match what's going on your page, right? So we have a little bit of a bump going on there, and of course, this is going to again kind of clean up here. And of course, again, you see that there's multiple lines, there's a lot of sketchiness. I want to add that to my piece too, right? Again, whatever your artist did, you should do as well. And that includes little extra things like sketchier lines. So that's a faster line. So again, I can see Pontormo was probably trying to figure out what was happening in terms of the drapery that was probably going on with his model. For me, it's kind of a good exercise to practice drawing a little bit faster, a little bit lighter than what I was doing over here, right? So again, your artist was doing things for different reasons, and you're doing things to practice, right? Again, for better or for worse, this is an exercise to help you practice your hand-eye coordination. Again, if you notice that your drawings have been looking a little lackluster in terms of that were being made, the different types of, again, speeds of line. This is a great exercise to really get in there and make sure that you are trying new things, right? Because it's important that we don't get complacent, that we try and take risks, right? Of course, I got this little guy here. I'll probably crop this piece of paper. Again, all I'm doing is I'm adding these sketchier lines that are up here because I'm starting from the top and working my way down. If you're overwhelmed, if your composition is chaotic, start and work in little chunks when it comes to finishing out your piece, right? Because again, compartmentalizing can be good when it comes to really finishing things up. And of course, if you're having trouble, again, taking a break, getting some physical distance away from your drawing can be a really good thing as well. Again, don't be afraid to take a break. If you're not really sure how your drawing looks, flip it upside down, take a picture of it with your phone, change the format a little bit, and you can kind of help to make things maybe a bit more productive. All right, so I did all the sketchy stuff going on up here. I'll probably need to shade that in later. Here I'm going to make sure that all my contours are looking good. Again, I haven't done any shading quite yet. I'm going to make sure that my contours are looking good, because if I do all my shading and I realize that my contour lines aren't looking good, I'll have to erase everything, because again, this drawing is kind of based on layers. So again, if you're doing a drawing that has a lot of shading on top of line, you want to make sure that you work in terms of layering as well. Don't go too far and too fast. Build things up, right? Again, I'm making things a little darker over here, right, versus up here. You can see how we kind of have a double line situation. And of course, if you're having trouble seeing this on the video, I will be posting the finished result as an example of submissions if you're not really sure how to turn this thing in when you're done with it. Remember, you'll be taking a picture of it, uploading it, all that good stuff. So again, my line gets darker where that calf bulges out. So I would like to do that as well. And just building on top of that line. And of course, I need to work on my little foot here. So again, I'm going to do some bit of erasing and really build up some of these details. Again, because it's so small, because my little toenails are super small, I want to make sure that I have a really sharp my pencil. So again, pay attention to your tools. If you notice that you need a crisp line, sharpen your pencil. If you need something that's a little more blunted, a little more soft, again, you can do a little bit of shading, or like I said, you can use the side of your pencil as well. Again, don't draw things that aren't there. You can see here on this particular piece that Pontormo was probably a bit more focused on this area when it comes to the level of finish. You can see that on this left foot, the big toe is fleshed out pretty decently, but you can see that the subsequent toes are a little bit sketchier. There's not even toenails or anything drawn in there. So don't draw things that aren't there. If your artist left bits unfinished, you will leave bits unfinished. And of course, you will note that there are some additional studies here on this page. I'll probably do those at the end as an extra little tidbit just to finish off my study. But for now, I'm focusing on the big picture first, the main component of my composition, right? Plenty of time for that later. So when it comes to placing this toe, let's see, I need to be a little further out. Of course, I'll move my hand so y'all can see. Nice. And of course, here's the pad of my toe. And then these are left a little bit sketchier, a little bit sloppier. So that's all I would need to do down there, right? All right, now I need to start to work in these values. So remember, if your drawing has value, i.e. shading, work from general to specific, right? I need to squint at my drawing and I can see that I've got primarily my shadows are going to be over on the right side of my legs, right? But I do have some really nice subtle shading, especially as we get shading of the knees here. So I'm going to want to make sure that I note those. Again, I'm going to be continuing to use my graphite. I'm going to be blending with my finger, or you can use a rag. Again, if your study drawing does have a lot of line-based value, which this one does too, you can see here how surrounding the legs, as well as up here in the upper thigh, you can see that Pontormo worked with a bunch of little lines to add value, to add a bit of definition. So realize that some of you guys may be working with blending and smudging. Some of you guys may be working with just layers of lines. Again, that's kind of the fun part about this assignment, is that you can practice all kinds of little finishing moves and stuff like that. So I'm going to start to get in with my blending, right? So remember, start with general big patches. I'm going to start with this leg first. I noticed that I have a little bit of shading. Again, you don't want to be too precious. Remember, with our initial, whoops, my thing is shaking. I'll try not to shake the table as much. You will notice that, remember, your initial exploits with value should just be big patches, right? You can see how that's not very pretty. It's just a big kind of stripe of shadow. But remember, working in patches, working in layers is going to result in a more correct, a more comprehensive view of what's going on the page, right? And of course, keep in mind your 6 divisions of light and shadow. Some of you guys may have drawings that don't include all of those, but this is something that you guys should always think about when you are considering how to, or when you're thinking about light, shadow, an object that has some sort of realism to it. So um, again, some of you guys may be working with pure line drawings that don't have that type of depiction of light and shadow. Some of you guys may be dealing with more of a kind of a graphic aesthetic, a graphic based approach. So definitely realize that you don't always have to include value, but when it comes to drawing realism, you're probably going to have some sort of light and shadow. So again, I'm just capturing the light, the shadow, right? Again, I'm paying close attention to what's happening here. I can see Pontormo noted reflective light. So I definitely don't want to make this whole side dark. I want to leave this little strip here light, right? So when I blend it, it's not going to get crazy. So when I squint at my knee, because there's a lot going on here, squint, kind of think about where those main little patches of shadow are going to be. I've got a bump up here, got a bump there, got this little guy here. Again, break things down really simply. It's going to look really sad and awkward, but remember, if you start getting in there with details too quick, if you make a mistake, you're going to have to then erase it all, right? Because remember, we want to go better than just good enough. We want to be great. So again, you can see very basic, very patchy. And I'm laying these things in relatively quickly, right? You can see I'm really taking too much care, not too much of a sensitive hand. If you're sitting there doing this, you're being really precious, really slow, your drawing's going to take a lot longer. So remember, we do want you guys to, you know, show us some finesse, show us some sensitivity, but remember, economy is the sign of a mature artist, and there are some steps that you can and should work relatively quickly, just like with our organizational line drawing. A quick sketch breaks up the space, allows you to establish your drawing. If you spend a long time dilly-dallying, then you won't really have time to deal with the finer details. Just like here, right? Get your big sloppy general areas done fast, then you can really work on finishing it up and really getting those details in. So budgeting your time, very important. So of course, again, you'll notice that I'm kind of changing the direction that I'm shading in. Try your best to kind of remember, if you remember back to cross contour, right? The idea that we can use line, we can use aspects of our mark making process to emphasize the um, the surface of our forms, right? Here you can see the roundness of our legs are emphasized because Pontormo shaded in different directions, right? So don't be afraid to move your wrist, right, to get kind of that fine movement. We talked about ergonomics, right? And one of the best parts about kind of zooming in and drawing a little bit smaller is the idea that we can take advantage of the fine wrist movements. And of course, this exercise here is going to help us practice those finer movements, those hand-eye coordinations. Again, if you need to rotate your piece of paper to get some better vantage points, you can definitely do so. But otherwise, I'm going to work on this foot because, again, I got my general shadows. Let me add a little bit more down here. My general shadows are done on this foot. So now I need to add some on the other foot. So again, I'm changing the direction. I'm shading up. Right. Not being too fussy right now. There's plenty of time for details in just a little bit. Break the ice, get those initial values laid out now. Otherwise, you'll just end up with some empty areas. In this case, just some empty legs that are going to look flat and sad and not at all what Pontormo had in mind. So I'm starting to build up. Again, always looking back to what you see in front of you, just like what we do in class. So I've got that dimple for the knee. And working relatively quickly because, again, the sooner you get these initial tones established, the general ones at least, the blurry, blobby tones, the sooner you can then go in and really kind of add in those beautiful details that I know a lot of you guys really itch to do. So, right, now I need to make a little bit of a lighter area. So again, as I'm working on this, I'm not just, you want to be mindful, basically, right, as you're working on this. So as I'm shading, I'm saying, okay, I'm learning a lot of things about the structure of this leg, right? I can see because I'm shading between this calf muscle and where the shin is, I can then go on my other work because I do a lot of figure drawing. I can say, okay, that's kind of a cool thing to remember back to, right? The idea that we do have kind of this division of muscles in our leg, and that can be something cool to keep in mind for the future, right? It's always good to remember these things and think about how you can use the things that you've learned during this master drawing for your future pieces. Again, even if you're not going to draw in the style of your artist or you're not going to draw the subject matter that your artist draws, it's always nice to think about what you can learn from this, right? So now that I have my initial shadows established on my actual forms, again, we do have some shading going on around my legs, but I'll do that later. I want to make sure I do these first because I know myself, if I shade my background first, I'm going to smudge it all with my hand as I'm working. So for many of you guys, you may want to save your background till the end if there is a background in your drawing here. So what I want to do now is if I'm observing my drawing, I can see that all of these shadows are very smooth. So I'm going to want to go in and blend and smudge to those out. If you guys remember back to our value exercises, sometimes it's nice to leave your materials unblended, a little bit rougher. Other times it's good to really go in and smudge. And remember to smudge and blend, you can use your hands if you're okay to get dirty, or you can use a little rag, or you can use a little corner of a paper towel to do that, right? Because of course, sometimes, especially if you're a little messy, sometimes you can blend a little bit unevenly with your fingers. If you have, again, sometimes the oil in your fingers will sometimes cause, especially the charcoal, to kind of blend in different ways if you have a lot of low-key situations. But you can see I'm just using a little rag, right? Kind of push and blend and smudge. Again, remember, don't just kind of smudge all over the place. Be very kind of careful. You can see how I'm using my fingertip. Again, observe. There are some areas where I need to go back and erase back because they may have blended one another or gotten too dark. That's okay. That's part of our process. Again, if your drawing doesn't really call for blending or smudging, that's okay. Just file this away for later because, again, it's always good to think about value drawing and that kind of stuff because that's our module right now, right? Right. So now that I have some smoother touches, you can see that, again, I need to kind of lighten things up, right? Because remember, 6 divisions of light and shadow, we have highlight and light. So of course, I definitely want to bring those back. Of course, you can use your eraser to bring these things back, right? Especially if maybe you didn't shade super dark, which is good. It's better to have many lighter layers than to have a single really dark layer. It's a lot harder to erase that type of stuff. So I'm going back, I'm erasing, right? I'm bringing back some of these areas that got pushed back a little bit too much. And your eraser can be a great drawing tool, even if, again, you only have the eraser on the back of your pencil if you're working with, again, your graphite. But we definitely need to remember it's important to get in here and get this stuff ready to go. I'm gonna make sure that shin bone is popping out. And just using my eraser to pull these guys back. Nothing too crazy here. Erasing there. This guy got pretty dark over here, so I probably want to bring some of that back. Okay. And then of course I can come back with my rag. Like I said, I can go to a clean part of my rag, wrap it around. And I can blend the edges of those erased areas so it's not just these big blocks of white, right? And again, the softer pencils that you use are going to blend and push a little bit more easily than your harder pencils. So be mindful of that as you guys are rolling along, right? So now that we have our big patches of value, now we can really go in and add those finer details, those little bit kind of more focused areas of shadow, right? So here, when we look at this piece, we can see we have a little bit of a sharper shadow here. We've got some staying on with the dimpling and the shading of the knees. And we also have some finer details happening down here. So now we need to go in, now that we have our base tones, I can go in and add a little bit more detail, a little bit more finesse, right? And of course, again, these may be patches of blended or unblended value, like you can see here. Just adding a little bit more blending. Taking care to shade very carefully. I'm not pushing too hard and too the surface of my paper. Just adding another layer of darkness, paying attention to exactly where that goes in my source drawing, right? A little blemish up here. Not sure if that was intentional Pontormo, but okay. We're just adding, again, like I said, these finer shadows, right? Because we worked in big patches. Now it's time to work in teenier areas, right? And you want to build up that range of value. Like I said, some of you guys may be choosing drawings that don't have a lot of contrast. Some of you guys may be choosing some very high contrast situations. You can see when you look at this piece, there is contrast. It's not super in your face about it, but you can see that there are areas that are dark. There are areas that are not so dark. So definitely pull those out as you're working. And again, we're layering. That's going to be key. Again, I can always come back and refine some of these contours if they got pushed a little back. But you can see how in my piece they're supposed to be a little bit softer. So I'm going to need to pull back a highlight over there, but for right now, I'm going to refine this little guy. Add a little bit of a shadow here above that ankle bone. Darken that contour. Again, you're building things up as you get to the different areas. If you want to start at the top, work your way down, that's great. If you have a different method of attacking your composition, you can definitely do that. But let's see here. Let me refine this little calf area that I was so excited about. Okay. Again, general to specific, right? Of course, if you get a little lost, that's okay. Again, pay attention to what we're doing here. Get that guy going. So again, I'm just building up my values, right? Really getting in there and getting those little details all worked on. Again, making sure you're trying to stay true to your source. So this guy looks a little bulbous down here. Let's try to fix that little guy. Again, always look back to what's going on here. Again, use your eraser to pull back things that maybe got pushed a little bit too far back. And of course, now that I'm establishing my tones, it's important to look at our lines as well. Again, if your contour line is a little bit obliterated, you can definitely bring those back, especially in terms of sharpness. Some of you guys may be working with a lot of fuzzy lines. Some of you guys may be working with, again, a lot of really sharp, clean lines. Make sure that you get those in there no matter what. So I'm also noticing that here, especially in my upper thighs, I have a lot of these hatching lines, right? And remember, hatching lines are lines that denote tone or shadow and go in a single direction. So just to show you here, these hatching lines that I'm doing for Pontormo are just a series of lines kind of that travel over the muscles like these, right? So I want to make sure that I emulate those as well. If I just go and apply just a bunch of horizontal stripes, that's not really what we're going for here. So I'm going to put some of these lighter lines, kind of like cross contour in a way, but they denote shadow, right? So I'm adding these on top of my shadows, right? So you want to be nice and careful. Again, if you need to practice on the side, that's always encouraged, even with your values too, right? If you need to do a little value scale, practice some shading on the side, you should definitely do that, right? Because sometimes you need a little extra practice before going along, right? So we have some lines. We also have some lines over here, right? So we have a bunch of them kind of going in the opposite direction. Again, I'm using my wrist and figuring out how far they go, where they stop, how hard they are. Go relatively fast on these so we can do other stuff. But again, these are to help reinforce our lines. And I've got some more over here. Get some more kind of coming over here. I'm Again, a lot of the kind of older master drawings do utilize this technique, so you might want to get a little practice in, especially if you know your drawing includes them. I can also see some happening over here. So just some patches of line. Because again, this is going to help us to make this guy look a little bit more like this one, especially in terms of the surface quality. So now that I'm working on my legs, right, I need to pay attention to the surroundings. So I did all the gestural lines up here already. Now I need to go and really finish this guy up. And to finish this piece up, I want to make sure that I add all of these lines that you see kind of coming off of the legs here. So again, if you need to rotate your piece of paper, if it helps you, again, to move things around so that you get, again, better angles on things, please feel free to do it, right? Make sure the comics are in check. I'm going to keep things relatively right side up just so that we're not going crazy here. So, step back a little bit more. So, again, I have lines running all the way up. So I'm going to start at the bottom this time just to do something different. I want to pay attention to kind of the basic angle that I'll be working in. And about how long these lines are going to be. So they're just kind of coming up. They get a little longer up here. You guys can see I'm working on those. Again, this could be a cool technique maybe for me to add to my drawings a little bit later. I'm looking for ways to sort of emphasize and add a little bit of spice to my composition. Maybe some lines around the edge of my objects could be a cool thing to try. So they get a little lighter, they get really short, all the way up here, right? And then of course I do have a lot of that going on in here in between. Again, most probably paying attention to kind of the shading and the shadows that happen when the body is casting shadows down here. So that's why the center area is probably pretty shaded. And of course, adding in my lines in between the legs. Some lines going on here. And of course, for my little ball here, I noticed that he did put some lines here as well. So I will be doing that as well. And that'll help me to establish this shadow of where this foot kind of exists over here. Right. So got a little dark there, but that's cool. That's cool. So now I have some really light ones over on this side because again, this is the side of my body that's being kind of a light source. So we still wanted to emphasize this form in space. I'm going to darken this line a little bit because I was a little too gentle earlier. Of course, you can add a little bit more here. And this is the part where, like I said, we are dressing this things up, right? We are adding in all the little details, what our artist had in mind in terms of perhaps fitting this thing out, right? So of course, extra little details such as your lines are going to be what you're going to want to do now. If, like I said, there are any contours that you forgot about or that got blasted away by your blending and shading, you can do that. Any sorts of areas where you need to erase to bring back highlights, you're going to want to do that there. And then of course, like I said, if I did want to include these extra little bits, I could definitely do so because again, that is part of my composition, but I did for the demonstration want to focus on the main feature. I will be working on these toes next, but of course I did want you guys to see again what happens when you need to tackle something a bit more comprehensive. So I'm going to add in some of these little sketchy lines down here to finish this guy off. Remember, if you see it, you must draw it, right? Whether this artist had that in mind or not, right? I'm going to add this little paper fold line to make it look a little bit more authentic. Again, if you're making drawings from drawing that are really old, some of you guys may notice that there is like little blemishes on the page and stuff like that. You can see a big stain right here. You don't have to include that in your drawing unless you really wanted to go authentic. Some students, if you are drawing on perhaps paper that's supposed to be, or you're copying a drawing that's supposed to be on toned paper, maybe you want to give more antiquated look. In the past, some students have experimented a little bit and they have before they started drawing, dipped their paper in some tea or some coffee to kind of color it a little bit. It's totally optional. You don't have to do that. You can just draw on plain old white paper, but of course, if you wanted to try some new things, or if you notice that your drawing is doing some spicy stuff, you can definitely experiment as well. There's lots of ways that we can, again, emulate the greats, and of course, playing with paper could be a cool thing to do. But remember, I will be focusing on taking a look at, did you pick an artist from our slides? Any of the slideshows that you see listed on Canvas, definitely go through those and skim through them. Again, you're not quizzed on them. This is an art history class, but I do expect you guys to have at least a familiarity of the major players within the drawing history. So pick an artist that you like. If you don't know what you like or you're not really sure who to pick, let me know and I will help you select one. But of course, it's always nice when you guys are able to pick things because, again, it'll reflect your own goals, um, your own preferences and things like that, which is definitely what we always like to see as well, right? And again, like I said, if I did want this paper to look maybe um, a bit older or a bit more kind of atmospheric, I could add a very light shadow of gray in the background if I did want to use my pencil, but that's totally optional. So like I said, this has been our master study drawing. So like I said, if you are not sure where to begin, view the previous videos. And of course, if you have any questions or need clarification, let me know. Remember, parts of this assignment may seem a little bit difficult or maybe a little bit rote, but of course, remember, there's a lot that we can learn from other artists. And of course, we're still applying the process we've learned so far. Again, we're just stepping into another artist's shoes and we're using their subject matter as our life as opposed to a still life object. And of course, remember, try to pick a drawing that you think you can learn from, even if it's just technique, even if you know maybe you need to practice your shading, maybe you need to practice your blending, definitely do that, right? A lot of students will pick things that maybe that they've never drawn before, or maybe that subject matter intrigues them, realize that that could be really great. But also remember, the technique is something that we do expect to see. So pay attention to the lines, if there's shading, if there's other lines, and learn from that as well. Otherwise, we are looking forward to seeing what you guys are able to come up with next.